All right, good evening and welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here. We have an absolutely tremendous lineup of panelists tonight, and I'd like to jump right into introducing them. One of the things I want to mention is that, there's, in this space of the Mob Museum and the mob history, there's all these podcasts and documentaries and TV series. And that's great, we're part of that. But the folks on this panel tonight are not actively involved in most of that. They, but they're very, very important to the story of the history of organized crime in New York City, especially that we're going to talk about tonight. So we're very privileged to have this group of panelists. I'll start with the person on the far end. That's Jeff Sallet, retired as an FBI special agent after 24 years of service, concluding as the Associate Deputy Director, the number 3 position in the agency. Jeff started as a special agent in 1997 in the New York field office, where he investigated public corruption, labor racketeering, organized crime, and counterterrorism. He was the office's co-lead financial investigator for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In 2007, Jeff transferred to the Providence Resident Agency, where he led an investigation that resulted in the near dismantlement of the Rhode Island faction of the New England Cosa Nostra. Maybe that'll be a program we do down the road. Sallet also led the investigation of the Boston Marathon bombings, which resulted in the capture of the suspect in 104 hours. So that was really good. Please welcome Jeff Sallet. Closest to me is Kimberly McCaffrey, as she's a retired FBI special agent with more than 25 years of investigative experience. Kimberly incorporated forensic accounting with traditional methods to investigate organized crime, terrorism financing, fraud, and corruption. She worked in the New York and Baltimore field offices as well as at FBI headquarters. She is a certified public accountant in the state of Maryland. She currently works as a contractor for the FBI, investigating complex financial crimes, specializing in asset forfeiture. Please welcome Kim McCaffrey. In the middle, Paul Cantarella became a made man in the Bonanno crime family in 1996, following in the footsteps of his father, Richard Cantarella. Exposed to organized crime at a young age, Paul's path seemed set until his arrest changed everything. While in custody, he discovered that friends, family, and longtime associates were cooperating with authorities. Facing a lengthy prison sentence, Paul was forced to make a life-altering decision: remain loyal to the code of silence or choose a future with his wife and 2 children. In 2003, he entered witness protection and began a new chapter of his life in Phoenix. Since then, he has built several successful businesses and shared his story through a variety of media outlets. Please welcome Paul Cantarella. So you can see we're going to talk about Joe Massino tonight and the Joe Massino case, but what I'd like to do briefly is kind of explain about the Bonanno crime family. And I will do this, but if I either get something wrong or these guys have something to add, we'll talk about that after. But obviously the Bonanno crime family is one of New York's 5 Mafia families. And specifically, before we dive in, I want to say this is about the Massino case. But this brief history will be mostly about Joe Bonanno. He was born in Sicily. He moved with his family to New York when he was 3 years old, but moved back to Italy 10 years later. He returned to the United States in 1924, fleeing Benito Mussolini's wrath. He became involved in bootlegging and was a key player in the intrigues and murders of 1930 and 31 that remade the Mafia in America. Those murders and maneuvers led to the rise of Lucky Luciano and the Mafia Commission. At age 26, Bonanno became one of the youngest Mafia bosses ever. Bonanno built a crime family that profited from a mix of legal and illegal businesses in New York, California, Arizona, the Midwest, and even Canada. Through a number of confusing and violent conflicts known collectively as the Banana Wars, Bonanno lost control of the crime family in the 1960s. He was effectively exiled and relocated full-time to Tucson, Arizona. But the Bonanno crime family continued to operate in New York City with a long series of bosses and acting bosses. One of the most notorious was Carmine Galante, who worked to control the narcotics market. Galante's rise in the family didn't last long, as he was assassinated in 1979. I want to mention briefly that although the Bonannos did not have as high a profile as some of the other families, like the Gambino crime family, for example, their story did produce a couple of the most significant books on organized crime history. You see them here. Gay Talese's Honor Thy Fathers about Joe Bonanno and his rise, and Joe Bonanno wrote a memoir, which was very controversial at the time that a mob or a mafia boss would be doing that, but it's really interesting. It's probably 65% true, I would say. But nonetheless, a significant book. And then King of the Godfathers, which deals specifically with our story tonight. The Bonannos were in various states of disarray until Joe Massino took the reins in the early 1990s. By the late 90s, after a series of high-profile prosecutions in New York, Massino was essentially the last godfather, thus the title of this program tonight. Jeff, if you could start, could you kind of characterize the Bonanno crime family when you came on the scene in the late 90s? So what was going on with them?
First of all, good evening to all of you, and thank you for being here. Truly a privilege and honor for us to be presenting. And by the way, this is the first time that Kim and I have ever been on stage with a made member of the Bonanno family. I want to make that very clear. So that's a very significant event. And so thank you, Paul, for sitting between us.
No, thank you.
Paul said, which you guys didn't hear, and I have to say it, sorry, Jeff. He said, with all these lights in our face, it feels like when you showed up at my door to arrest me. But I figured I'd actually kind of add a little levity to this. But in the late 1990s, when Kim and I showed up, the Bonanno family had what I would say is regenerated. And it regenerated because the Bonanno family had been the subject of a undercover operation, which many of you may be familiar with, which is Operation Donnie Brasco. So an FBI special agent had infiltrated the Bonanno organized crime family, and this is in 1981, came close to being a made member of the family. Based on the actions of Joe Pistone, the special agent, and then what had happened after that, the Bonanno family had been kind of exiled from the rest of organized crime because they were concerned about cooperating witnesses and people that would be in there. Ironically, the Bonanno family is the last of the New York 5 families to have had a made member cooperating witness. And I can say the guy sitting here actually is it's hard to actually pin down who the first one was because they were all kind of simultaneous, but Paul was one of the first made members of the family to cooperate.
Is that good?
I think so.
You're sitting here today.
He looks pretty good, doesn't he?
I guess it turned out okay.
So Paul, could you sort of give us a taste of what was happening within the family at that time from your perspective? In other words, what were you guys involved in and what were you seeing?
Before the arrest? What was I seeing?
Yeah.
As a made man?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I took a step back when I was made because then I wound up getting married and having children. So actually, my father he was my captain. I don't know if you know that. I was put under him. He was not making me go to any meetings or anything to keep the light off of me, which Joe Massino actually told him, you have to send your son some places. So I actually took a step back to be under the radar. Really, the stuff was before. That was where I was a little bit more involved and stuff. But
what kinds of activities were you guys involved in? Parking lots and.
As far as legally, parking lots. Illegally would be lending money, loan sharking, gambling. Jeff and Kim might have a different opinion of what else I was doing. I don't know.
So I just have to add this. How many people here are from Manhattan? Anybody try to park in Manhattan? You want to tell me that's a legal business, the parking? I'm kidding. It's a bit of a shakedown, is it not, Paul?
Thank you. So even legally, I was going to get arrested.
The legal shakedown,
So
but
a legal shakedown.
Or Jeff and I would argue that the way the Bonanno family got into the parking lot business may have been slightly illegal because they bought into it at quite a discounted rate. Otherwise known as extortionate, maybe?
I'm not really aware of that. Explain that to me.
That was before his time, right?
well, hold on a second, Paul. We got to actually. Did you ever burn down somebody's shack in a parking lot that was your competition?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Okay. Just thought I would bring that up.
I liked fire a little bit.
So, Kimberly, let's go to you. So at this point, you and Jeff are brought into the case, and one of the reasons was because of your forensic accounting skills. I mean, Joe, as I understand it, Joe Massino was pretty good at disguising his connections to these crimes, right? So you needed to find a way to build evidence.
Right. So Jeff and I are actually both certified public accountants, and the supervisor of the Bonanno family at the time, a man by the name of Jack Stubing, you know, Joe Massino was considered untouchable. People knew that he had committed murders, but he really did minimal time. So Jeff and I were sought out by Jack to come and work on Squad C10 in New York to use our forensic accounting skills. So we were kind of like, you know, the Elliot Ness of the day, the modern day Elliot Nesses, I guess. And we sort of were made fun of slightly because Jeff and I's first investigative step was to subpoena Joe Massino and Sal Vitale's CPA. Where else should we start but going for the accounting records? We were CPAs ourselves. So where everyone else on the squad was doing traditional techniques, going out on surveillance, or I don't even know what they were doing, you know, Jeff and I came back with literally 9 boxes full of subpoenaed financial records. And this was in 1998, 1999. So we're doing Excel spreadsheets, just putting in like literally nerds. But we loved it, and you know, we found our needle in a haystack.
Did that ultimately become part of the case? I mean, a big part of the case, or not so much?
It became what broke the case.
It broke
Okay.
the case,
Yeah.
yeah. A single set of checks broke the case.
Which was the purchase of the parking lot.
That was to Joe.
That was your parking lot. Hey, wait, did you give Joe Massino and Sal Vitale a little bit of a parking lot gift? Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I didn't agree with it, but they did it.
Okay, and
But
why
we
did they
had parking lots.
Paul, I'm
We
going to
had-
have to help you for a second, Joe.
Yeah, help me.
Why did they do that? Why did they give them the $25,000 investment for a $32,000 annual return? Do you guys like that return, by the way?
It's just a good investment.
It was a good investment for them, but why for you?
He's the boss of the family, but I told my father not to do it, to be honest with you.
Well, you could tell your father that
He didn't
you
listen.
could have saved him from the FBI.
He did not listen. See, I'm going to tell him that, too. He did not listen to me.
And so just so everyone understands, the reason why, as Paul had said, you know, our legitimate way of making money was the parking lots. So this was Joe Massino and Sal Vitale's way of legitimizing their money. And the Cantarella family and the Coppa family, who were Frank Coppa and Richie Cantarella, were captains in the family at the time. So what they did was they bought, again, at a discounted rate, into a very lucrative business, the parking lot business in Manhattan. And there were multiple parking lots. There wasn't just one. There were
3.
Yeah,
3. They were
3 at the time, and then
It was more than that.
even more than that, up to yeah. So, you know, organized crime is very lucrative. So you're driving a nice car, you're living in a nice house, you're going on nice vacations, and at some point, someone's going to question where this money is coming from. So they bought into these parking lots to show that, oh, look who's working at the parking lots. Sal Vitale's working at the parking lot. No, he's not. Diana Vitale, his wife, no, she's not. But they all had W-2s from these parking lots. Their
No
children
shows, huh?
had W-2s from these parking lots. I assure you, they never, one day, they couldn't even tell you where these parking lots were. They never parked your car. But this is the way they legitimize their money, otherwise known as money laundering.
Right. And Jeff, I want to add here, because I think it's really important. We're joking and having fun here, but to be very clear, it was very serious business. And we wouldn't be sitting up here with Paul if we didn't feel that Paul was somebody who actually was repentant and didn't believe that it was a good thing to be in the mob. So just to be very clear, because I think it's important for us to say that we've been talking to Paul for 25 years almost, right? I mean, it's a very long time. So we have a comfortable relationship, but understand when this was going on, there was not a lot of laughing.
No.
As a matter of fact, I mean, Paul's wife is here somewhere in the audience.
There she is.
And Paul's wife would tell you, I think you said this, Kim, when we were just taking the picture, I can't believe this is happening. And that wouldn't have been something they expected. But I think it's really important for us to say that, because one of the things that Kim and I did, and I will say this is important, Jeff, is when we did go on a few different documentaries when we were FBI agents, but one of the things that we told people we would not do, we would not go on any documentaries or stations that were glamorizing the mob. Right. So we actually refused, I'm not going to tell you which network, but there was a network that was glamorizing the mob. Kim and I refused. They asked us to be on one of their documentaries. We refused to be on it because they were glamorizing the mob.
I would take it one step further, which is even though we'll continue to have some laughs tonight, I'm sure, but we've been talking about parking lots so far, but as we move on here, we're going to be talking about murders, and a lot of them, and so that's not fun either. So, we just want to make sure we're making that point. One of the things that also not fun was that your case got, interrupted a little bit, shall we say, by the September 11th terrorist attacks, and you guys were assigned to that for a little bit. How did that go?
I mean, I'll start. I mean, I was next to the North Tower when the South Tower fell. And so, and Kim and I were actually in trial. There was one criminal trial in the Southern District of New York on 9/11. We were on trial with Ron Carey, the president of the Teamsters, which is interesting because that was one of the cases that we had been working on, which was completely based on our forensic accounting skills, why we're on that one. And, I think, going through those days and looking at that, I got assigned over to the counterterrorism branch, and my ask, sorry, Paul, this didn't make your life any better.
Thank you.
But I actually said, as soon as I could, I want to go back to working organized crime because that was my passion, but was working on the financial investigation for 911.
Gotcha. So I thought at this point we'd talk about how this case took a very interesting turn, and I've got a series of pictures of individuals who ultimately, as they say, flipped or became government witnesses, and this really was kind of a dramatic turn for the case. Why don't we start with Sal Vitale? And Sal became a critical witness in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
He did. I think we'll go back a little bit. You might not have a picture of him, but we'll start with our first cooperator was a guy by the name of Barry Weinberg. And again, Jeff and I, starting with the finances, we could tell that this person, Barry Weinberg, who would never be a made member of the Bonanno family because he was Jewish, he was what appeared to us to be extorted out of a lot of money, or he was sharing his very lucrative businesses with a lot of made members of organized crime. So we wanted to figure out who this person was. And so we kind of focused on him and figured out that he had evaded over $14 million in income taxes. And so when we ultimately approached Barry Weinberg and said, hey, buddy, you have a lot of tax problems and you have two choices. You're either gonna go in front of a magistrate judge today to face your tax issues, or it appears that you're hanging out with members of organized crime every day, and we'd like to know why you're doing that, and you might want to consider working with us. He's like, yeah, it took him about 10 minutes to make the decision that he was going to work with us. So he ended up wearing a wire for 9 months. Wow. And unfortunately for Paul, he sat with Paul's father 4 days a week, and he gathered a ton of evidence for us against a lot of people.
And Jeff, I think it's important because as Kim, so we go from Barry to another individual. I'm going to not use his name because I don't know how much I was out there publicly. Who, and Paul could probably tell you a little about this. Maybe he can describe to you what his dad and he were thinking at the time. But they started becoming very suspicious of Barry Weinberg to the point where we were worried that Barry's safety might be in jeopardy. Paul, do you want to talk about that for everybody? Because I think that's a very significant piece, and you can share insight from a side that Kim and I can't.
Yeah, I believe Joe did ask my father if he wanted help to get rid of him. And at that point, my father said, no, he just has money crimes on me or whatever, and passed on it, luckily for Barry. But yeah, he said he used to put his phone straight up on the table and say, I can't really get reception on my phone. So my father would say, you're full of shit, get out of here. And he heard your phone, it was your phone probably, ringing in his trunk one day of his car. And he said,
it's
Barry,
always mine, by the way.
It's his. He said, Barry, there's a phone ringing. He says, Barry, he says, I don't hear a phone. It's clearly not their phone. He said, there's a phone ringing in the car. It was in his trunk. So these were the things.
I guess you weren't looking at his pager then.
Yeah.
This is in the pager days, which I will actually say because they don't use them anymore. Paul was in the pager.
Okay.
It wasn't in the cell phone.
I wasn't there, so
I just because your dad was trying to outsmart us, it was not the cell phone. Just to be clear.
You were following him every day. We knew you were there.
Every day. I'm the worst surveillance guy ever, and I was always following him.
He still won't admit that he was following me and I saw him.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Sal. I know if things go a little bit out of order, that's okay. But Sal let's talk about him. He was the number 2 guy in the Bonanno crime family, right?
Correct. He was Joe Massino's brother-in-law.
Yeah, I mean, I think so if you're talking about the person that had every story and every piece of information, he was the guy. It's interesting because when you ask an audience, people will say, "Of course, I know who John Gotti was," right? John Gotti was the boss of the Gambino family for, 4 years before he went to jail for life. Joe Massino actually took the reins of the Bonanno family in 1981, and it was a team effort. It wasn't he officially became the boss in 1992 upon the death of Philip Rusty Rastelli, but was essentially running the family since 1981 and the murder of the 3 Bonanno captains. So when you actually move this thing forward and you talk about Joe and you talk about Sal was involved in every single Bonanno murder, pretty much, going from when Joe had him involved in the first murder, which was a guy named Joseph Dudu Pastor in 1975, who they murdered. And so if you actually go through Sal's history, Sal was involved in every murder, and Massino actually used him as the front guy. So the guy that was involved in doing everything for Joe was Sal. And so Sal was a key when we actually arrested him. He was a critical witness.
How did you get him to flip?
Kim, tell the story of the day, because I think it's important.
Okay, so we knew that Joe Massino was considering killing Sal because he thought that Sal was weak and that Sal would cooperate. So Joe and Sal were arrested on the same day, and when we were talking to Sal the day he was arrested, we actually showed him Joe Massino's detention memo, and in that detention memo, it talked about how Joe wanted to kill Sal. And we showed it to Sal, and we said, read these pages. And he said, I want you to prove this to me. And we just looked at him and said, Sal, we don't need to prove it to you. You know it's true. And he literally just said, you're right. And he didn't cooperate right then and there, but he knew that it was over. It took him about a month before his attorney actually did reach out. And you have to realize it's a very complicated thing. And Paul could explain this a little better. When you're in the mob, sometimes you don't have a choice in who your attorney is. There's certain mob attorneys, and they're going to report if you're wavering. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't just decide to cooperate with your mob-appointed attorney. So there's a whole shadow attorney issue that has to go on. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes before someone actually, sometimes you have to remove their families before it's known that they're cooperating. So that was what was happening at that time. I mean, we kind of had a feeling that we were going to get that call from Sal's attorney, but he knew that it was up.
I mean, there's other cases, tell me, maybe you can explain this, Paul, but further, but I mean, there's cases I can think of where you have to go around your attorney, right? I mean, you go directly to the FBI.
Yeah, I made my wife call Jeff
There you go.
when I was sitting in county jail. I said, I'm not having somebody raise my children. I could kill friends, family, everybody I grew up with. I'm seeing the paperwork that they're cooperating on me. I could care less for anybody else. I said, I'm not going to do it. I told her to make a phone call and call Jeff.
Yeah.
And we switched lawyers, but they start to figure out you're cooperating really quick.
Yeah.
Really quick.
Right, because his attorney initially was Jimmy LaRosa. Actually his dad
I'm Jerry
was Jerry Shargell,
which was John Gotti's lawyer at one time.
both, by the way, very good lawyers. But the defense lawyer who actually one of the defense lawyers, his dad's defense lawyer, actually is the same defense lawyer that was used for Sammy the Bull Gravano when he cooperated, and he's a former assistant United States attorney. So, the way that we would do this, and this is actually giving you a little history here, is they would have to appoint shadow counsel. And, we can talk about how Joe Massino was assigned shadow counsel later when he does himself cooperate. But if you had a lawyer and you came in and you wanted to talk to us, we can't talk to you, right? I can talk to Kim. She's not represented, but I couldn't talk to Paul. So we have to get Paul counsel. He would have to have counsel to represent him because the FBI doesn't talk to people that are represented.
Gotcha.
Which once you decide to cooperate, it's really your prosecutor's your lawyer for the whole, that's the end of your lawyers. So don't let them kid you. It's the prosecutor and that's it.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on to Richard Cantarella, your dad.
Yes.
So tell us about him. I mean, he was more of an old school guy, right? Old school kind of mob guy. What was he like? And let's talk about when he cooperated.
Jeff is going to have a different opinion than me. I mean, my father really, and Kim, I should say, my father really didn't bring that home. He wasn't one of those guys that would live it 24 hours a day. I mean, did he probably think it in his head? Absolutely. But there's other people I know that they think they're in the Godfather and it's all day long.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my father at home. Could he get there very quickly? Absolutely, if something was going on. But growing up with him, it really wasn't. He didn't get made until 1990, which I believe it was 90, right?
Approximately
90?
Approximately, yeah.
So I was graduating high school. I mean, things were changing for him. People were starting to realize things like that. But he was pretty low-key. He didn't speak to people back then as far as letting people know who he was. So Jeff
Well, I
and
think
Kim,
you explained he thought of himself as a businessman, ultimately,
Yes.
which is fine. He was, but he also had these other things going
yes, he did. But he didn't speak of that. You didn't know it at home when he was home. He was a family guy. So.
But by the way, that's, Jeff, part of our right? So, I mean, and Kim, I don't know if you want to, I mean, like, we did know that the Cantarellas were family first and mob second, which was part of the reason that they were frankly, an effective target for us, because there'd never been a made member cooperator in the 70-year history. You need to figure out who's the potential cooperating witness, your future one, and then who has access to people. And based on his dad's relationship with Joe Massino, which was a very close relationship, both personally and financially, it was both good and bad for them, right? But I mean, I'll say this, and Kim, I don't know say, but I used to call Paul a suburban gangster. Sorry, Paul.
That's okay.
He had a curfew until he was 21 years old, yet he was out doing home invasions in between his curfew. That's his old school stuff. Kim, is that fair to say? Thank you. Okay. He's getting a little
Well, he
offended.
was worried if I didn't show up.
Right. He was, but this is serious. His dad literally, he grew up in a very tough Italian family, right? Yet he somehow became a mob guy. And, I think that's significant.
Yeah. I think we also, Richie Cantarella did consider himself a businessman, but then we also discovered that he participated in 3 homicides.
Right.
We also knew that Richie probably was not the type of person that was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. So, you know, Jeff and I always had a theory that the money guys were not the guys that were going to spend, they didn't expect to spend their life in prison. They could spend 18 months, they could do the white collar time, but they weren't going to spend the hard time. And we always talk about, you know, what protected the Bonanno family for so long from having a cooperator is what ultimately was their demise. And I'll try and explain this. So what the Bonanno family did when they committed a homicide was they involved everyone. They probably involved 15 people. They would have a setup crew, a murder crew, and a cleanup crew. And they did this because if the 15 of us were involved in a homicide, and then Jeff got arrested for gambling, he's not going to cooperate on a gambling. He's going to do his 6 months on a gambling charge. And the family's going to be like, oh, good job, Jeff. You did your time for the family. Because if you cooperate, you have to tell the government about all the crimes that you've been involved in. So if Jeff's going to go to jail for 6 months for gambling, he's not going to say, oh, by the way, I murdered someone too, because now he's facing life. So that worked great for 70 years until we arrested Frank Coppa. And to be honest, we arrested Frank Coppa on extortion and white-collar crimes, and Frank Coppa did say, oh, by the way, I was involved in the murder of Sonny Black.
Right, which is the three captains.
Was it the three captains?
No, he was involved. He was involved in the Sonny Black. He was involved in the three captains.
And at the time, we actually had no
He's
idea.
a very fit guy. Check him out.
Yeah. So
he was the fitness czar for the Bonanno crime family.
So, right, Jeff, we had no idea at the time that he was involved in the murder of Sonny Black. So when he told us that, we're like, oh shit, okay.
Wow.
So we're like, great, you know, we played it very cool. We're like, yes, you were. And we would like to hear all about that. And then he told us about the 15 other people that were also involved in the murder of Sonny Black. And it just opened the floodgates. Wow. So
I want to go back one last question about your dad, Paul. Did you know about these murders he was involved in, or was that something he wouldn't have shared with you?
No, he wouldn't share it, but I mean, do you pick up things along the line over the years? Yes.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't outright talk about it, no.
Right, and I'm sorry, Paul,
go ahead.
and I know this isn't easy for you to hear when you're sitting here. His dad was involved in a pretty vicious murder. And I think that's something, you know, despite the fact that he became more of a family / businessman. I mean, one of the lines that we used to use is justice delayed is not justice denied. And I mean, there was an individual that was killed over a $10,000 debt, and they were worried about him potentially cooperating. So I'm sorry, Paul, that you're sitting here and you got to listen to that, but there is something that's significant, and it's deathly serious. Right, so he didn't cooperate out of his good graces at the time. There was, you know, and by the way, for those of you that have seen Donnie Brasco, there's an individual, the person who actually introduced Joe Pistone into the Bonanno family is Tony Mira. Tony Mira was his cousin or uncle. Tony Mira was killed by his dad and a guy named Joey D'Amico. And so they actually are the ones who killed the guy who introduced Joe Pistone into the Bonanno family.
Mm-hmm. What can we say about, not so much this photo as Frank Lino, another cooperator, right?
I mean, Frank Lino, did you guys ever see the movie, what's with Harvey Keitel's movie? He's the cleaner. He's Pulp Fiction. Frank Lino is the cleaner, right? Every murder in the Bonanno family during the Joe Massino era, they assigned Frank Lino's crew to clean it up. And Frank Lino actually had probably one of the worst, most dangerous serial killers in the history of the mob in his crew. a guy named Tommy Karate Patera, who was responsible for more than 30 homicides, who was doing life sentence, but was more of a serial killer than he was a mob guy.
A little bit. He took his work home.
He took his work home, yeah. If you looked at him the wrong way, he would kill you.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's talk about Vinny Bassiano. This is a little different kind of a story, but it's still very much part of this case. Who would like to pick
Kim,
that
you
up?
want to talk? Well, I'm happy to do it, but
Yeah, you go ahead with Vinny. I'm good with
you can
him.
say, all right, so I got to say, Paul,
Yes.
you guys have pretty similar hairdos when I'm looking at that one right there, which is a compliment because that was Vinny Gorgeous,
That was.
right?
Yeah.
So
I liked him.
of course you did. You have to tell your story of Vinny Gorgeous. So the Bonanno family, and I think, by the time we start investigating them, the person who was actually involved in the most homicides at the time was Vinny, personally involved in his crew. Massino would argue in court that he was the benevolent Godfather, and that because of him, people lived.
I saved lives.
I saved lives, which is a quote during his
how you look
cooperation.
at it.
I saved lives. Last time I checked, you're not God, right? And so you making the decision that you're, quote, saving lives, right? I mean, I would say Joe Massino, as you heard, offered his dad help with Barry Weinberg, okay? His dad, and he turned down the help with Barry Weinberg. That help would have meant that Barry Weinberg would have been killed. That was in 2001, right? Now, I have to say, Paul, it's a pretty good thing that you guys did that because you would have been killing an FBI witness or attempting to kill an FBI witness, which wouldn't have gone very well for all of you, right? It would have gone really bad. But when you're talking about Vinny, Vinny's a guy he's running a crew up in the Bronx. He had been acquitted of a case called Blue Thunder. His attorney was a guy named Ben Brofman, who is a very famous New York attorney who then, I believe, represented Sean Puffy Combs and got him off the first time. But Ben Brofman was a very good attorney and represented Vinny, and Vinny was involved controlling the Bronx. They called him Vinny Gorgeous or Vinny from the Bronx. Vinny was involved in two things. One was his mob family stuff, and he was very violent. And the other part was his construction business, because a lot of these guys, and this is kind of the tack of the mob, have moved into or attempted to move into legitimate businesses. Vinny was involved, actually the last homicide that I personally investigated was ordered by Vinny Bassiano. That person was a guy named Randy Pizzolo, who was killed in December of 2003, November 30th, December 1st of 2003. He was killed in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg area, and we actually charged that murder in January of 2004, which is unheard of in the mob cases.
What else can we say about Vinny? What role
He's a
did he
handsome
play?
man.
Yes?
I
What
would
role did he
actually
play
say
in this
anybody
case?
under 400 pounds in the Bonanno family was considered good looking.
Paul,
that's fair,
I would
right, Paul?
say that
I don't know about all of us, but
the role that Vinny played was Joe Massino's cooperation post his conviction.
Yeah.
Because I would argue that Joe Massino did not want Vinny Bassiano to take over the Bonanno family.
Okay.
So if you all don't know, after a 9-week trial and many years of our lives, Joe Massino was convicted to 2 life sentences and was facing the death penalty for murder and aid of racketeering. And Vinny was not arrested at the time, but was primed to take over the family. And Joe Massino, literally a minute after he was convicted, told the marshals that he wanted to speak to Jeff and I, and he wanted to cooperate. And I'm pretty sure it had to do with the fact that he did not want Vinny to take over. He pretty much wanted the family to be dismantled if he was not going to be in charge of it anymore.
Interesting. Well, before we get to the next slide, I want to go back because there's a little story about a recording of Richie that is a humorous story about something you caught on tape with him talking about one of our panelists.
Yeah, I like this story because Richie didn't say it about me, which I'm very grateful of. But Barry Weinberg was wearing a wire at the time, and they were hanging out at their favorite restaurant, Danico's, in Little Italy in Mulberry Street in Lower Manhattan. And Jeff and I were, sometimes we like to just kind of rattle them, and we'd walk down the street on Mulberry Street, and we'd like to hear what they had to say about us. So we walked down the street, and Barry turns in the wire, and lo and behold, what do I hear on the wire? Richie, Paul's dad, says, there's those two agents. Kimberly, now keep in mind, Jeff's last name is Sallet, but Richie said, there's Kimberly McCaffrey and Jeffrey Slater, S-L-A-T-E-R, Slater. Looks like he's put on a couple pounds.
Needless to say, I went on a workout spree. I was very offended by this.
And I was like, damn, if he said that about me, I would have found a way to add an additional federal charge to that. Somehow, there was going to be a charge, but yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Joe Pistone. So Joe, great friend of the museum. He's been here a number of times. He's on our advisory council, so he's not this is not new to some people here, but he was a critical part of this case, although he wasn't part of, he was a witness later, but his whole thing happened in the late 70s and early 80s. But we could kind of explain what he did and how he helped this case.
So, I think what Kim and I would always say is the Massino investigation was a culmination of decades worth of work for a large team of people, right? So, while Kim and I were the, quote, case agents, this was a team sport, and the team sport dated back into the 1970s. As a matter of fact, when we prepared for the Massino trial, we prepared 130 witnesses, and dating back literally to when Joe Massino had been arrested in 1975 for truck hijacking. And he actually was arrested with John Gotti, which is an interesting story, which we could chat on. But Pistone, and I really say that the history of the attack on the mob, the FBI didn't even acknowledge the existence of the mob until 1957, the Appalachia Conference. J. Edgar Hoover refused to actually acknowledge the mob. They acknowledged the mob. You then have the 60s, where you have Bobby Kennedy was really pushing very hard on looking at and investigating the mob. This is when the FBI was conducting illegal wiretaps, because there was no such thing as Title III authority, which was actually part of the Omnibus Crime Act of 1970. And the Omnibus Crime Act of 1970, which was signed into law by John Mitchell and Richard Nixon. Both of them were actually the two first people that had a problem, John Mitchell specifically, with the Omnibus Crime Act of 1970. Believe it or not, this is true. And so when Pistone started his undercover in the mid-1970s, there wasn't process, there wasn't history, and he really was like what we would say is the pioneer in the infiltration. And then what he did, it wasn't even the cases that he specifically made, it was all of what he did from a symbolic standpoint, because, and I'm going to tell this story. The two patron saints at the time in the Bonanno family that were under Philip Rusty Rastelli. This is a longer story, but you have there's the three captains faction, which is one faction, and then you have the Philip Rusty Rastelli faction, which was kind of brought together the other groups. The two biggest players in the Rastelli faction were Joe Massino and Sonny Black Napolitano. Sonny Black Napolitano's number one associate was Joe Pistone. Joe Massino's number one associate was Sal Vitale. So the books were not open at the time, and the two top people to get made when the books were going to open were Joe Pistone and Sal Vitale, to give you an idea of how trusted Pistone had become. When Massino, and this is a line I need to use because it goes to Joe, there's a couple things. One, when it became clear that Pistone was an FBI agent, they actually went out you see it in the movie, and they hand out pictures, and they hand it out at the social club in Williamsburg, his social club. And when they hand them out, it's literally a picture of Joe Pistone and Edgar Robb, the 2 FBI agents who were the undercovers, with the 3 FBI agents that were delivering the pictures. Okay? And so when they deliver these pictures, they're like, oh my God, this is Joe, right? Those are the pictures. This is Donnie. They literally thought they were like AI, of course, in 1981, right?
Well, they actually thought for a minute that he had been kidnapped by the FBI.
Right.
So they could pose this picture.
They could pose these pictures. So Joe comes off the street, and they don't kill Lefty Guns Ruggiero. They never get to him. They do kill Sonny Black Napolitano. And Joe Massino's line, because I think this is critical for Pistone, he said, we got to send a receipt. So when Joe Massino would want to kill somebody, he'd say, we're going to send him a receipt. And they sent a receipt to Sonny Black Napolitano because he let Pistone into the family. But one other piece to this, which I think is critically important, Massino was about Massino. So it wasn't really necessarily about sending a receipt. Sonny Black Napolitano was his biggest competition to take over the family, so he had a reason to eliminate him.
2 other quick notes there. You mentioned the illegal wiretaps in the 60s. Those also were conducted in Las Vegas, for those who are wondering. And they revealed all kinds of skimming going on at the casinos, but they couldn't use them to any positive effect. So they didn't really bust skimming in Las Vegas until the 70s and 80s. And the other thing is with Joe Pistone, another thing with J. Edgar Hoover is he didn't really want agents going undercover. He thought that was, they could be compromised in some way. And so that's why by 1976, when Pistone does go undercover, Hoover died in 73, subsequent bosses were like, we need to do this undercover thing, but they didn't really have a program. Like you said, he was a pioneer.
Well, in this picture, everybody knows this picture, there's a place called the Toyland Social Club. The Toyland Social Club was the social club of a guy named Nicky Glasses Marangello. Nicky Glasses served as the underboss of the Bonanno family, was actually the father-in-law of a guy that got murdered, a guy named Robert Perino, who was another homicide that his dad was involved in. Perino was the superintendent of delivery at the New York Post. And the mob was controlling the delivery union at the time. But that picture was taken by FBI agents that were in what they called a post across the street from the Toyland Social Club. They were taking pictures of everybody going in and out. You actually had another picture that was in there from that. But when those agents took that picture, they had no idea, because nobody knew he was an undercover. That was a guy they were trying to identify.
Wow. So, Paul, we talked a lot about the history of the Bonanno crime family tonight. And a lot of times when you're a young adult, you're not that interested in history. But I'm curious to know, how much of this did you know at the time? Like, were you interested in all of this history, or were you just living your life?
To a certain extent, yes. Especially this year, let's say, but not all the way back to day one. I mean, did you understand all the way back and read about it? Yeah, but I didn't have that much interest to go all the way back with it. But to tell you the truth, I met John Gotti when I was 16. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Yeah. So it didn't turn out that good. But
well, where did you meet him?
I met him in Little Italy. My godfather was Joe Butch Carrera, and the Gambino family was a captain. I actually spent more time with the Gambinos than I did with the Bonannos when I was younger. My father there was a lot of politics going on with my Uncle Al and everything, so I wound up meeting him when I was 16, I think, in the height of him being John Gotti.
Yeah, so you were seeing him in the tabloids and everything, then you met him.
It'll never happen again like that, what was going on. If I swear the air was different when he was coming. It was just the feeling when the man was coming around was unbelievable. People would start to pop up, and you would see guys with suits on and cars being parked, and he just commanded respect in the neighborhood.
You had the 4th of July events and all that. Did you do that?
Yeah. I didn't go to those, but we were always in Little Italy. So when he would come there on Wednesdays is when I met him.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Kim and I would sit and talk to Joe at the trial, just making small talk with him, usually trying to talk about food, because that was an effective tool with him. You did see him, right? There's actually a story that when he got out of jail, seriously, he got out of jail after he was in from 1987 to the end of 1992, that he went to a Chinese food restaurant on Cross Bay Boulevard in Howard Beach, and he ordered one of everything on the menu.
Yes.
Fact.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember that.
You remember that? Okay. So when we were talking to Joe, and I think this is where I'm going to say, we'd say to him, we go, what about John Gotti? And he looks at us, remember this? And he goes, John Gotti set the mob back 100 years.
Yeah.
And he said, John would make $1 million a week, and then he'd lose $1.5 million every weekend to bookies.
He was the worst gambler in history.
One of the worst gamblers. Said he was a complete degenerate. And what Joe would say to you is what saved the Bonanno family and him from that prosecution was Joe was in jail in 1987 to 1992. And when he got out of jail, he actually told everybody in the Bonanno family, wakes, weddings, funerals, only one person from a crew. He wouldn't show up at anything himself. And so he learned from every mistake because as he thought it was, great, he's a celebrity, it's not good to be a celebrity criminal. That's not a good thing to be, right?
Two more things about Massino, right? One is, it's important to note, too, that we talked about food and liking food. That's how he got his start. He had what they called lunch wagons back in the day, and now we call them food trucks, right?
Yeah.
But, that was his business, right?
Go ahead. You got to tell tell the Massino Vitale King Catering, because I think that's a fun one.
Well, how much money did they get paid? They were consultants.
$17,500 a month each.
A month each. And they were consultants for making the sauce.
I didn't even know this.
Yes.
Is that what it was?
That was King and Queen Catering.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the excuse, by the way. And by the way,
that was more legitimate income, by the way. Everyone, W-2s from King and Queen Catering.
So what ended up happening is the lunch wagon business, they were selling numbers off of those trucks, okay? But in order to protect the lunch wagons, because it was kind of like the trash business, you needed a mob guy to be affiliated with you so you wouldn't get shaken down. Now, Joe really did run trucks when he was younger.
He was younger.
Right? He did run the roach coaches. That was how he got his start. They called them roach coaches. But by the time we get to the case, he and Sal were both collecting $17,500 a month each to be employed by King Catering or consult to make the sauce. And David Breitbart in trial actually argued that that's what he was doing.
Wow.
He said that they were security.
Security. Yeah, he said they were security.
Because if they didn't shake them down, someone else might have come and beat them up.
The secret formula.
So it was security.
That's funny.
Yeah, and I think that was one of Jeff and I's, at least it was one of my frustrations when we first started the case. We would go and talk to what we thought were victims, like the owner of King and Queen Catering, and say, what is Joe and Sal's position? And they're like, oh, well, it's just the price. Or we would go to, parking lot owners who were paying extortion for protection, and this is the late 90s in New York City. You would think that this stuff wasn't happening anymore. And they would say, oh, it's just the price of doing business in New York. $17,500 a month, the price of doing business in New York? Get me into that business.
That's good money even today, right?
And it's no, that's not the price of doing business.
Yeah.
So.
We talked about you touched on the trial earlier. I want to come back to that. So, big trial, like you mentioned, 130 witnesses, people interviewed anyway. How did this trial play out?
Well, how about we do the arrest of Joe Massino to start? Because I think this is actually, this is one of those stories that people really like. See that tracksuit he's wearing, by the way? That's the day we arrested him, right? So,
and this was at 6 a.m.
6 a.m. He looks pretty good for 6 a.m., right? And by the way, in Tony DiStefano's book, I have to get a plug in here. I'm looking around the room. Some of you might appreciate this, might not. I'm a diehard Beastie Boys fan, okay? And so in the book, Tony DiStefano's book, and I can tell you, the car that I had then was a 2002 Buick, or 2003 Buick Regal, 4 doors. It was like a maroon color with jet black windows. And I played No Sleep Till Brooklyn right before we arrested Joe Massino.
Very loudly.
Very loudly. And by the way, as Tony DiStefano describes in the book, there would be no sleep for Joe until he got to the detention center in Brooklyn. And he was in Queens because he was in Howard Beach. But when we go to the door, because I think there's a whole bunch that goes behind this, but we come up to the door and we hit the door and his lights are on. Like, we had already had a surveillance team on him. And the reason we had a surveillance team on him was he was indicted in 1982 and was on the lam for 2 years when he got indicted in 1982. So we knew the second he thought that people might be cooperating, that he might disappear. So we had a team on him. We show up at the door and he looks and he goes, "Good morning. You must be Kimberly and you must be Jeffrey. I've been waiting for you."
Yeah.
And why did he know us? Thanks, Paul.
So, anything to add, Paul, about that?
That was Paul. Hey, Paul's sitting up here. I don't know anything going on. The mob, nah. Just I really didn't pay that much attention.
They weren't very hard to spot. They were there every day. And I think I actually asked you once that some guys don't see them. I saw you all the time. I don't know how some guys are stupid enough not to know you're there.
We just wave. Hey, how you doing?
I mean, they were there all the
time. But it's also, Paul, right? Like, it's part of the mob culture.
Yes.
If you get a call from us, if you get interviewed by us, you need to report to Joe.
Oh, yeah, that could be a problem.
So your dad obviously knew that Jeff and I were on him. Your dad was reporting. He knew it was me and Jeff that were looking into him. So that's how pretty much Joe knew who we were when we came for him.
You could wind up being killed if you don't pass that back to him.
Right. Yeah.
So how does this trial play out? Just in summary. Lots of testimony, pretty damning.
8 weeks to pick an anonymous jury.
Yeah.
Okay. It was 8 weeks to pick the jury. The trial was, I believe, 7 more weeks after that. So trial concluded the answer is we paraded numerous made members of the Bonanno organized crime family up on stage. But reality is we're going back to this idea that this is a team sport. We literally brought in law enforcement witnesses from 1975 going forward, from every single crime. Kim and I sat collectively in a room filled with files. We looked at every single Bonanno case dating back to the 1960s to find every single bit of evidence that had ever been presented in any one of these cases, and then we brought those things in. So the 1975 book that we took off of him, he was arrested with John Gotti for truck hijacking. Yeah. So for people, and I'm gonna do this quick because I know everybody loves John Gotti, right? Stories. Joe Massino and John Gotti were involved in a murder of a guy named Vito Borelli. Vito Borelli was dating the daughter of Paul Castellano, fame of getting killed at Sparks Steakhouse. While he was dating her, he was referring to Paul Castellano. You guys remember Frank Perdue, the chicken guy? He kept saying that Castellano looked like Frank Perdue. So he didn't like that, okay? So for disrespecting him, he ordered him dead. And the murder was committed by Joe Massino and John Gotti. They killed him at a guy named Anthony Ribito's cookie factory in Manhattan, okay? They killed him. He got brought out to Brooklyn into Canarsie, where the Testa brothers and Roy DeMeo destroyed his body. And so it's like every part of like history, but Massino did that in 1975. And so when we presented that, actually that might have been 76 or 75, but we presented a book. Joe Massino's book that was taken off of him in 1975 had the names and phone numbers of almost every made member of the Bonanno family and other families, which is racketeering evidence. Trial was there. We brought all these witnesses in. The jury did not last long, and they came back with unanimous guilt on all counts.
But here's something that I'll add that Jeff said before, like, we did go back and review these files from 20 years ago, but the beauty of, they didn't, from back in the Pistone days, they didn't make many cases. Unfortunately, they gathered a ton of evidence, but there weren't many arrests from those days. But we actually were able to capitalize on the evidence that they collected. So when someone like Sal Vitale tells us about 11 murders that he was involved in, and he says that these 5 people were involved in that murder, and then we then go back to the surveillance files from 1982, and we see those 5 people on the day of that murder getting into a vehicle. It's pretty great corroboration of his testimony saying, oh yeah, those 5, and then he's on the stand saying, oh yeah, that was us heading to go kill that person. Yeah. So there was so much evidence that was gathered 20 years ago that we were then able to pull into this from the testimony of all of the witnesses. And all of the witnesses were different characters. I was telling Paul earlier, you had, when Sal testified, obviously that was a huge family affair. He's testifying against his sister's husband, his brother-in-law who raised him since he was 7 years old. And it was, you could hear a pin drop, like it was so tense in the courtroom. And Sal, for committing 11 murders, he was actually felt remorse. Like he did at some point when we were debriefing him, was like, wow, I'm a bad person. Like I really ruined a lot of lives. And then you had someone like Joey D'Amico, who literally sat in the witness chair like this. And the prosecutor was like, do you still wish you were in the life? And he's like, yeah, I hate being here right now. Like, this sucks. Like, I want to be back in the life. And, but how do you not believe a guy who's acting like that? And he's talking about the murders that he committed, but he's like, unfortunately, I was caught, and now I'm going to tell the truth in the hopes that I have a chance to live a life.
That sounds like Joey.
Yeah, and Paul says, that sounds like Joey. That's his cousin.
Well, and then his dad was on the stand. This is actually classic. The attorney goes, "You're a liar," and he goes, "Correct." You're a murderer. Correct. Okay? And then he says, and you've done a lot of bad things. Correct. All right? And then he looks at him and he goes, "Mr. Breitbart, this is the Mafia. That's what we do." And that was so powerful because, by the way, Joe Massino's best friend, his dad.
Yeah.
Right? So when his dad just looks at him and goes, yeah, murder, yeah, check, 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 yep.
And we did it for this guy.
This guy right here, the guy in the front row, that's the guy.
Yeah. I want to give you a chance, Paul, to talk about what happened with you when you, they came for you and then you decided you didn't want to, spend the rest of your life in prison or whatever. I mean, tell us, kind of walk us through that sequence of events. You're in jail and then you're in witness protection and then you're not.
Well, when I first got picked up, we thought it was a very small case, which I've asked Jeff nicely that he should have explained it a little better.
My failure to explain that he was going to get charged with RICO?
Yes.
Okay? Kim and I sat with him in his basement when we searched their house, his parents' house, for 12 hours. Okay?
Still wasn't explained.
12 hours.
Very good. Like you said earlier, you said we didn't know nothing about Sonny Black and we just went along with it. So I don't know this until they prove it. They had to prove it to me. So, but when I started to realize that, friends, family are cooperating and I didn't get caught doing anything. These are all people that I know are telling on me. I have no interest to have my son or my daughter brought up without me. So I mean, from there, we went in and we started to learn the case. You start reading people cooperating on you, and you know who it is. They don't say their name. It'll say, John Doe said this, this, and this, but I see the conversation. I know who it is.
Yeah.
So as it starts going on, and then they want to rearrest me with conspiracy to murder and some other charges that are going on, I tell my wife, I said, I'm not coming home anytime soon. So I made a decision to cooperate. And, like I said, I'm not going to do all this time for anybody else.
Yeah. So if you don't mind telling, I mean, you went into witness protection, and you're a New York guy, New York family, and you end up in the American South.
They put me in Memphis, yes.
Memphis. How'd that go?
It was terrible. It was terrible. But I was out on bail, actually. They had asked me if I would go into witness protection. And I said, whatever gets me back with my family. I was happy. My wife wasn't. So I was getting out of jail. I was going to be with my family. They weren't. Well, my kids were young, so it didn't matter. But my wife, I wound up dragging her through that. But people would ask me, no New Yorker moves here. What are you doing here? So what's the best answer? I say, I'm running from the mob. They would laugh hysterical. So.
He literally called me up, and he goes, they asked me if I was in the Mafia. And it wasn't a Mafia.
The Mafia.
Mafia. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, God.
I said, I'm running from them right now.
And we didn't know where he was, by the way, at the time. We only knew where he was afterwards, because they don't even tell the FBI agents where they put people in witness protection.
Because the Marshal Service handles the witness protection.
And then I would be asking Jeff when I could get out of here, and he would say, I don't know, 2, 3 years. And then all of a sudden I asked him one time, like 9 months in, and he goes, if you want to leave, you can leave. Little did I know, Joe flipped, and probably my threat went from here to like here. And he said, you could move. I said I could, and that was it. I put in, I told them I'm leaving. They weren't too happy, but we moved out to Arizona. We bought a house, and that was it for that.
Paul, is it fair to say that we were trying to keep you alive?
Oh, absolutely. That's
I just thought I would make it clear. We weren't just torturing him by putting him in Memphis. I lived in Louisiana. You can live the whole country's great to live in. You just got to settle in. I didn't put you in Memphis.
No.
Well, so
you actually told him not to put me.
Yeah. Did you have any hesitation about leaving witness protection, though? Because you could, in theory, have been threatened or hurt.
No, not at all. I don't know why it never bothered me. Maybe I'm stupid. I don't know. I knew my family was safe because we never bother women and children and families, but I had to be with my family, and whatever came, I'll worry about it then.
Yeah.
By the way, I have to put this in here, Jeff, because I think it's important. When Joe Massino did cooperate with us, he actually told us that there was actually never a hit out on Joe Pistone, because he told everybody in the family, if you touch Joe Pistone, you'll be killed. Because he said, we got beat by the undercover FBI agent, we don't go after FBI agents. No. I will say that that's something, and that was stuff we had heard from multiple members of the family, was that there was not a hit on Joe, and that doesn't mean that other families wouldn't have taken him out. Yeah. But from the Bonanno family's perspective, he did not want anything he got it. Like, they got beat, and all that's going to happen if you kill an FBI agent is going to be a really bad day.
Yeah.
Right.
It is interesting, though, that Joe definitely he was nervous, and even today takes a lot of care to make sure he knows his surroundings and everything. Well, very good. So, how are things been going the last 20 years, Paul?
Oh, everything's been going very well. I'm out of prison.
Yeah.
I got to see my kids grow up, get married.
Yeah.
I have a grandchild now.
You got businesses. Your dad made it out to Phoenix too, right?
Yes, he came out after he served his time. We own 2 car washes.
Perfect.
I work with my son every day.
Yeah. And you're out of the life, obviously, and enjoying that.
Absolutely. When
you look back, I mean, regrets?
I wish I never got involved. Yes.
Yeah.
It's all, you don't mind my language, it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it was always like that, or was it more like that when you were involved?
I was definitely more when I was involved, that era. But I'm sure it had a hint of bullshit its whole existence.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that to keep in mind the context of what we're talking about here. We're certainly talking about mob incidents that went back as far as the 70s and the 80s when the mob was still very prominent. Mm-hmm. But really what we're talking about is the early 2000s. That isn't that long ago.
No.
I mean, this is, and the Mob Museum didn't exist at that time, but I mean, it was only 10 years later that the Mob Museum opened. I mean, what was going on, Jeff, with the FBI? Were they losing interest in organized crime, or were they still very intensely interested at that time?
I mean, look, I would say that, and we always talk about this. This is, again, being very clear, this is a team sport, right? We took the work of an entire generation before us and then used their amazing work as part of our team effort, which was exactly what every squad was doing that was attacking the mob, right? The cases were made on 30 years of investigations and evidence, and that was what we were working with, right? So when we talk about this case, we always talk about how many people, you can't even fathom how many people were involved in the success, right? And what happened is each one of these cases that happened in the late 90s and the early 2000s just was a devastating impact on the mob. And when I say devastating impact, it was, you know, our case solved 30 plus cold case homicides dating back to 1969, right? It started with financial numbers from the end point, but there's all the investigations and efforts that went on before that led to it, right? And so when all these cases start coming down, our squad did the Real Sopranos case too, which was simultaneous to our case, right? And they flipped the acting boss of the Cavalcanti family, right? So what was happening is, I'm gonna put this very clearly, Kim and I used to say this, people are like, how do you flip a made guy? We'd go, evidence.
Yeah.
Okay? And so like people are like, it's not about being charming. You treat people with dignity and respect because that's what you do. But it was about evidence and what the charges would be, right? So when we get to this point, the FBI just closed the Gambino at one of the squads. They're down to one squad in New York City, right? And the argument is that, you know, the last known murder, besides which was there's the associate murder, which happened up in the Bronx, which was Vinny's old crew, where they hired the Bloods to kill the father, the Zitolos. But the last murder is actually a Bonanno murder of a Bonanno soldier who, by the way, to tell you how glamorous it's gotten, was at like 4:30 in the morning taking a bus into Manhattan to do his job.
That's it.
Okay?
Terrible.
Just to give you an idea how far the mob has fallen. But that's the last murder, and that's years ago. So the answer now, I got asked this question when I was in Louisiana working there, and I said the mob is outgunned by the gangbangers, and at that time outsmarted by the politicians. I would still say, I mean, the number one threat in this country right now, which is violent incident crime, right, and gangs. And to spend the time on some of this stuff would not be the most prudent thing for the FBI to do at this point. The FBI is focused on transnational criminal enterprises, but it's not, they're rightfully focused on gangs because that's a crisis.
Sure. All right, so what I want to do is let's open it up for questions from the audience. I hope that you've been thinking about things that we didn't address during our conversation. Anything you want to ask, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone around to you.
I was just wondering, Paul, how much of your previous life and your family's life did you share with your children?
Oh, they know it all.
Do they?
Yeah, they kind of find it amazing. Yeah, all their friends too. Yeah, everybody knows out here. Yeah.
Interesting.
They had a television show, by the way.
Yeah.
On
So
the
if you wanna-
Oxygen Network.
On the Oxygen Network,
Yeah.
unprotected.
Yeah, little reality show.
Okay, a little reality show, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And you can see kind of what it would be like to live in the Cantarella's house.
Yeah, we had a lot of laughs with that.
Paul,
Go ahead.
I'm a friend of Francis, and I was curious to know what you thought of him merchandising and marketing. Did you know him? And
No, I don't know him.
You don't know him?
No, I know who he is. I don't know
Michael
him.
Francis?
Yeah, I know who he is, but I don't know him.
He's
But-
been very successful.
Yes, he has been. Good for him.
Marketing himself, and what do you think of that?
Hey, all power to him. If he could do it, you know, let him do it. But he is a smart man. He knows a lot of stuff, but I just can't do that. I
You
just
never
can't.
crossed paths with him in your life.
What's that? I'm sorry?
You never crossed
No, not at all.
You would have been a young.
He's
very
much
young
older.
man.
to
Oh, you know,
Yeah.
He spoke at the museum several years ago, and definitely drew a big crowd for us. He's He's been in Las Vegas a fair amount over the years, doing different things.
He had a show. He actually had a show here for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
We have another question? Here's one in front when you're done, up back there.
We've heard how Paul got into the mob. How did Jeff and Kim end up in the FBI?
Ooh! Go ahead, Kim. Kim's actually relates to John Gotti, so it's much better than mine.
So I grew up in New Jersey, and I always saw John Gotti on television, and I always wondered, how does the FBI know that this guy's the head of a mafia family and he's just walking around like he's a celebrity? But how did I end up in the FBI? I was studying for the CPA exam, and an FBI recruiter came and talked to our CPA review class and said, hey, I don't know if you guys ever thought of this as a career, but the FBI recruits a lot of CPAs. So if you are looking for a fun career where you use your accounting skills, come see me after you pass the exam. So I did just that. I passed the exam. I actually was working for an accounting firm that audited labor unions, and I was sent to Chicago, and I worked with 2 retired FBI agents. And they were like, wow, you would be perfect. You're a female, you're a former athlete, and you're a CPA. You're just what the Bureau is looking for. So I flew back to Baltimore. I handed in my paper application, and 10 months later, I was at Quantico.
Wow. What about you, Jeff?
So I always wanted to be an FBI agent. I grew up in Boston during Whitey Bulger and the Angelos, and I used to watch that stuff and say, these guys are all bullies. Why aren't they in jail? And I had an uncle that was a treasury agent in the 60s in New York City. So I actually became an accounting major to become an FBI agent. And so I became an accounting major and went and worked at then one of the big 6. And the day that I became a CPA, I put my application in the mailbox. Yes, to become an FBI special agent. And I was in the academy 9 months later myself.
The interesting thing I think about this is that when the FBI started, when it was the Bureau of Investigation in the 1920s, they were all accountants and lawyers. This was what they didn't even carry guns, So this is harking back to the origins of the agency. Not that you didn't carry guns, because you did.
Hey, by the way, Kim was a much better shot than me, to be clear. If we ever got into a shooting, Kim was going to be the designated shooter. All right? I just said that publicly for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we always said, we always talked about, if you think about it, every crime, except for a crime of passion, involves money. So if you're an organized crime, or if you're, a white-collar criminal, you're in it for the money. Yeah. If you're on the terrorism side, you need money to accomplish, you need money to either travel or to get the bombs or to get the tools that you need to accomplish your idealistic goals. So there's usually a money trail somewhere. And that's, how we ended up taking down the Bonanno family, through the money trail. That's how we investigate terrorism a lot, through the money trail.
Follow the money, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi. So working at the FBI and then just hearing your story of how much time and energy that you guys devoted, surveillance and, and everything, how did you balance your career, family, relationships? I mean, was it non-existent? I mean, how can you be successful at both?
I always love this question. And, I did a lot of recruiting for the FBI, and especially as a female, I would always get that question, can you have a family? Can you have kids? And the answer is yes. I feel like I always did a very good job of separating, and I think Jeff did too, our home lives from our work lives. I think, I'll say this as a working mother, you always are going to feel like you're failing in both places. I'm not dedicating enough to my job. I'm not dedicating enough to my family. but you just do it. It's obviously there's going to be times where, you know, it's not a 9-to-5 job. You have to have an understanding spouse. But it wasn't, obviously 9/11, we worked around the clock for months. But that's an extraordinary time. There's times that that's going to happen, but for the most time, it was manageable. And you just...
Yeah, I think Kim did a really good job, better, because she's much more talented at... there's nobody more organized that I know than Kim. So I say that to you, and there's no time waste as well. I think you have to be efficient, right? And by the way, like a lot of the stuff that we were doing earlier on was pre-kids because Kim was pregnant during the trial. So I think it's important, like, I used to say a couple of things. One, I could have been better at it, right, over time, you know, on life balance. But I mean, I'll say this for all of you because I think this is important. Kim isn't not only one of the most accomplished agents in the history of organized crime investigations, but she is the most accomplished female agent in addition to being one of the most accomplished agents. So,
oh, thanks, Jeff.
So reality, you know, and by the way, we're both pretty quiet in what we say now, right? But I say that as, you know, Kim's the example for a mother. Kim's the example for, you know, a young woman who's looking to go into the profession. People used to come in my office as a senior leader in the FBI and say, how do I get your job? I go, honestly, I don't know, because you just don't expect that. Like, I joined the FBI to catch bad guys, not to lead people, but then you get there, right? But I also would say I didn't do as good a job as Kim, but Kim is more efficient at you know, organizing her life. So I give Kim a lot of credit for that.
And I'll say that maybe I made Jeff a better dad and husband because we had kids around the same time. And at one point he came into work and he's like, oh, when I go home, you know, my wife is like, oh, you got to take the baby. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, yeah, take the baby. She's been home with the baby all day. I'm like, Jeff, he's like, but I've been working all day. I'm like, yeah, you've also been able to pee when you want. You've been able to eat when you want. And you're not like, take the baby, give her time. So I like to think that maybe I made you a better husband.
That fact. Yeah. And a well-articulated fact, to say the least. As a matter of fact, this is a quick Bassiano story, because this is going into this. My daughter was born January 31st, 2005, okay? The last complaint I swore out as an FBI special agent before being promoted was that Saturday night for Anthony A. Cielo, okay? And the reason that we were so on his tail was because he was the one who had the contract to kill our prosecutor. So I swore the complaint out. It was a Saturday night. I didn't get any sleep. I go home. My wife said, we ordered sushi, my favorite. My wife goes, my water broke. All right, here we go. So we drove into the city, into New York City. We lived in Brooklyn. We drove into NYU Hospital. And my wife has pictures of this. These are good pictures, Jeff, for any story. They're me in my Red Sox sweatshirt, okay, sleeping while she is watching Special Victims Unit, her favorite show. All right? And she goes, this is my helpful husband while my daughter is being born. And I was sleeping on the little...
You know, what?
At that time, I mean, I lived in Brooklyn. You could just... this is before Uber Eats and all that stuff. There's no better food than Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I mean, you could get anything you wanted. Yeah, there's no better food.
Paul, I want to give you the last chance to talk, because on a related note, you know, when you're arrested and then you're in jail and then you've got the witness protection, it's probably almost a question for your wife rather than you,
Probably.
but I'll let you, you're up here. How did you guys manage that whole relationship and with the kids and everything when you're going through that? That must have been tough.
It was tough, yes. Probably, like you said, more for her. But I have to give the credit to her. You know, she was able to manage it all. She stood by my side.
Yeah.
It becomes easy then when you have your family with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
She never asked me once about leaving. When I said we're going to leave, she never said anything. She said, let's go.
Didn't love Memphis, though.
Didn't love Memphis. But as long as we were together, she was fine. But never asked not to leave once.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We'll throw Kim a compliment because we worked with all these families. She was the most supportive wife of the group
Yeah. Very good.
for her husband.
All right.
I had a question over here. So, Paul, I'm curious about, given that for both you and your father, your lives took a direction that you hadn't initially planned on. I'm curious what your relationship with him was like in the later years of his life. And both of you were kind of post a lot of this.
Sometimes he thinks he's still in it. So as I got older, I spoke a little different to him. So it changed a little bit that way. But it's all good. You know, he still thinks a little bit about him being himself in New York. So you have to pull him back a little bit. But when I was younger, I wouldn't answer him the way I would now. So
His father is quite a character.
yeah, a little bit. So, but
He would not be as remorseful as his son.
Yeah.
Fact.
yeah.
Well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. Thank you all very much.